And welcome in again, everyone, to another edition of the BIS podcast, broadcasting live on the Marvin Network, a little Christmas edition of the BIS podcast. A ho, 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 and a Merry Christmas to everyone listening out there. Again, we're back on the podcast today with our very own Sterling Harris joining us again. He's got a little bit more of Texas history for us today here on the podcast, and it's a little special entwined into this podcast because it's all about Christmas, as we would think about. Again, we got a podcast going on during Christmas time. So, hey, how about a little interesting Texas Christmas history? And Sterling's got that for us. Sterling, first off, thank you for being on the podcast with us again, sir. Always a pleasure to have you on. And what do you got for us today, my man?
Well, Josh, I'm going to talk about, celebrating Texas, Christmases, in the past, basically history and how people celebrated, in the 1800s all the way up to now. But anyway, it's just, I found a wonderful article in the Texas Monthly, and it's called "A Merry Texmas," and Dingus had put this together, and I thought it was really appropriate because, I grew up in the hill country. I remember our Christmases, and it was always just real simple stuff. I mean, we were always cooking and, hunting. That was our big part of the fun, is getting to go hunting and bring some wild game in and cook it, and frying deer meat. It was just, a lot of fun. And our Christmas trees, I remember too, they were pretty, primitive too. I mean, we would cut a cedar tree down and put that up, and I mean, it would get a little crunchy in a few days, but that was a memory, of mine growing up in the hill country out there. But
Did you
anyway,
ever have to dig it up with your hands?
well, we probably had some old dull saw that we tried to cut them down with. And we were trying to get one, that really looked good. So that was part of the fun deal, is the search too, running around on top of the hills. But I grew up north of Wimberley, in a really rough part of the hill country there. But we had a lot of cedar, but I don't think my mom really liked it, having a cedar tree in the house, but but that's kind of what we celebrated with. And we got to decorate and everything. We thought it was pretty dang special. But
What? Well, that's just awesome, Sterling. Again, I could have loved to see that in your guys' house back in the day. But you talk about your time, your experiences at Christmas. During your time, your younger years, and how y'all did it with your family, and just by the sound of things, it was awesome. But tell me a little bit more about what did really Christmas entail back in the day. I mean, to where it is now. What was it like back then?
yeah. Well, I'll put this little article together, and it's fun to read. But I'll start off with this. Um, if you want to experience a real old-fashioned Texas Christmas, make sure you're equipped with gunpowder, moonshine, and adequate health insurance. For its first century, the state celebrated the holiday that was short on snow and sugar plums and other Dickinson trimmings. But there was no lack of fireplaces or family togetherness, known as cabin fever, and dozens of do-it-yourself diversions were readily available in the God-forsaken wilderness that was called Texas. For example, noise. It was cheap and easy to produce, and making it arguably the state's oldest holiday tradition. Frederick Law Olmsted, who visited Texas in 1853, described St. Augustine's Christmas serenade as a band of pleasant spirits started from the square, blowing in horns and beating pans and visiting the secessions of every home in the village, kicking in doors and pulling down fences. Locals forgave the vandalism. After all, it was Christmas. Later on, the increasing availability of gunpowder made recreational explosions popular tradition. Pranksters all ages, but a single gender, no doubt, poured it into dead trees or holes in the ground and then lit a fuse and ran. Particularly dangerous variation of the perilous pastime was the anvil shoot, a tradition that examples natural selection at work that exemplifies it. But two animals were stacked one on top of each other with a layer of gunpowder in between. Then bravest participant lit the fuse. The point was not how high the top animal flew, but how loud the roar was. With luck, it carried glad tidings to neighbors miles away. Eventually, mass-produced fireworks made the requisite holiday clamor easier to achieve, but it was less risky. In her 1894 memoir, Ranch Life, near Junction, Mary Jacobs observed that the fame of Roman camels' rockets, fireballs, spread in due course of forest San Antonio. As the display, we discovered that roof on the gallery was on fire. Our factor that allowed outdoor fireworks to become Texas Christmas tradition was the weather. Although the Panhandle, for example, regularly endured killer blizzards, and the state was mild, even hot on Christmas Day. In 1867, according to a San Antonio paper, the weather was too warm, the eggnog was spoiled. In the Star of Hope utility story in the 30s in Houston, William Carter noted that sun blazed down and electric fans were on. Historian J.B. Franks, born in Dallas, 1917, wrote, "I never saw a white Christmas until I was 58 years old." That was in Munich, Germany. Sometimes the holidays was noise was joyful. The first Noel and the parts was observed properly with prayer and hymns in the early as 1528, when the Spanish explorer Cabeza de Vaca and three men were holding body and soul together in Texas coast near what's called, ironically, Christmas Bay. In 1687, the French equivalent La Salle spent the day in the same region in San Antonio, San Francisco de Cathedral, and celebrated Christmas Eve Mass since the 1730s. What is now termed in interfaith service was once standard practice. In 1852, a young Catholic priest named Emmanuel de Medici wrote that he had conducted in Brownsville service for a crowd of every age, sex, and creed. But Protestant churches sprang quickly. On December 25th, 1858, 8 men and women in Matagorda schoolroom were the first Episcopalians in the nation to take on Holy Communion. Natives and immigrants of ethnicity enjoyed the enduring classic, the Christmas party, especially, and some were fortunate enough to own a musical instrument. Such pioneers, virtuosos for linchpins of yesteryear in social gatherings through truly essential element, at least until the 20th century, was a female dance partners. In 1882, Lizzie Campbell, the mistress of Matador Ranch, enlisted the help of resident cook who scraped his fiddle, and at the annual Christmas bash, she would invite 50 cowboys, and then they would have a warm heart and strong sense of self-preservation. She also arranged for 5 other women to attend, the closest of whom lived 70 miles away. The merrymakers trip fantastic for a long time in weary hours and chronicle, and particularly famous shebang was in Anson, which in 1885 inspired New York Times reporter Larry Chittiman to immortalize the event in his poem, The Cowboys' Christmas Ball. Of course, the town of Anson was in wild West Texas. In the 1880s, sophisticated Galveston saw many a risky affair breathlessly detailed in society columns. Miss Shart Willis wore brown velvet, pink roses, and diamond ornaments. In San Antonio's elegant Menger Hotel served as Christmas repast that included Benwick Bay oysters, baked filet trout en gratin, and prime beef in Yorkshire pudding. But regular old Texas feasted on game simply because they were the much else around. It wasn't much else around. Vegetarian was a swear word back then. Jack Elgin traveled the surveyors in West Texas in 1870 and stuffed himself with Christmas dinner. We had buffalo, antelope, deer, bear, rabbit, possum, possibly some animals that you do not recall, turkey, goose, brant, ducks, prairie chicken, curlew, quail, and other birds. He added that one of the hunters offered to furnish us with a mess of rattlesnakes and polecats, which he assured were most excellent delicacy, but our cook drew the line, said that's it. Novelist Edith Hamilton Kirkland, who was born in Coleman in 1907, was celebrated with less carnivorous Christmas, enjoying once in a year fruit and nut treats such as apples, oranges, bananas, walnuts, and coconuts. Texas fruitcake bakers traditionally substituted watermelon, round pink pickles, genuine citron, and sorely missed fresh eggs and milk. One West Texas wife lamented that her only ingredient for a holiday cake was sheer sweet ozone. Eggs and milk were also necessary for making the ultimate Christmas beverage, eggnog. But Texans weren't essentially as whiskey, which was a German visitor characterized in 1845 that national drink here with our Christmas is celebrated. It's called a white mule, a fiery, raw, distressing, an English traveler who complained around Christmas 1839. It made for eggnog of a very boisterous nature. Soldiers were especially famous for cutting loose at Christmas. H. McConnell, on duty at Fort Belknap in Fort Richardson in 1860, despaired of 1,001 ways, means that a soldier would indulge to get whiskey. Except for pink elephants, there weren't many other colorful Christmas ornaments way back then. German immigrants shocked the primitive Texans, had never heard of Christmas tree, and introduced the tradition to the Republic. In a few decades, trimming a tree became regular. In 1882, the Austin Statesman advised Christmas trees are now in order. If you cannot pay $2 for one, take a hatchet, go out in the woods, and poach one on somebody else's ranch. This was a standard practice even in the late 1947. Texas Forest Service ordered tips for harvesting the state's unlimited supplies of evergreen ropings and buried branches. In some areas, trees was much harder to come by. In 1890, Wellington Ranch wife recalled having to settle for a miserable little stunted cedar. Since shiny glass globes and other mass-produced ornaments were nowhere to be found, she adored the scrubby little tree with leftover calico tinsel made from foil and peeled off chewing tobacco pouches. Eventually, Texans would borrow many Mexican holiday traditions as well, such as piñatas. Traditional star-link-like shape was particularly fitting for Texas Christmas, and luminaires and the sand-filled paper bags that hold lighted candles are used in line and walk away. And porches, Mexico also gave us the poinsettia and the Christmas Eve flower and edibles like tamales and sweet cinnamon bonchitos. Then there was the problem of presents in the past. Pioneers' kids usually found their stockings homemade gifts such as rag dolls and hand-carved tops. Evelyn Miller Crowell grew up near Dallas and recorded in her memoirs in 1904, when she was 5, her presents from Santa included a doll, miniature stove with pots and dishes, and beaded purse, and books and books and books. In 1865, a Major General George Custer was stationed in Austin. He gave his younger brother Tom, a Jew, a heart with a note to give a piano a rest. Even stores became bigger and better to supply today's standards. The choice of goods were limited. Novelist Benjamin Capps recalled that for Christmas in 1929, when he was 7, he gave his mother a new spatula. Some gifts were even more memorable. In December 25th, 1907, a Hammett Voth young couple was blessed with a baby boy, Glenn Hart McCarthy, whose 40 years later was the rich, famous, flashy wildcatter. And no real Santa was ever more generous than Fort Worth's Tom's Wagner, who on Christmas Day, 1909, divided up half of his 1-million-acre ranch among 3 children. Miscellaneous entertainments rounded out the holidays, blowing up hog bladder balloons, for instance, and chasing livestock down Main Street. You had to do something special, well, shaved and greased up with bear oil for Christmas. One party of bachelor cowboys noted ruefully in the late 19th century, the only thing we could do was ranch hands frequently imitated medieval knights and put on rodeo-style tournaments. Amateur talented shows were popular and more during the time. Florence Finley of Uvalde participated in Carol Fest and literary stories in the 1880s. We just liable to spring Tennyson on them as soon as lesser poet and audience didn't understand, hear a word that applauded heartily. Having fun, especially at the holidays in Texas, was special. The determination to make the best of everything and come what it may, one tradition well worth preserving. In 1909, East Texas men recall particularly unpromising holiday of his childhood, and Merry Christmas as dark and dreary days of 1864 seemed almost impossible in Texas, where the pangs of war were nearly felt. But we had always observed Christmas in family, could not be abandoned the time-honored custom. Yes, we were going to have a Merry Christmas in spite of difficult situations. But anyway, this is a pretty good little overview of Texas Christmases. But I think I had some of the best ones in Wimberley, Texas when I grew up, no doubt.
Man, oh man, Sterling. I mean, that is so awesome to explain the history of Texas Christmases and just the way you went into detail. And hey, I know everyone's got their own traditions that they have, but kind of what you explained in there today is really some of the things, or more of the things still, that we do today for Christmases here in the state of Texas. And even though, you mentioned some of the things, I know my family does them. And so it's really cool just to see, even though the things that were done in the past still relate to times here today.
Yes, sir. It's Texas, is a really diverse group of people that came and settled here, during the Republic in the early, the late 1800s, and, just how everybody did things differently. But anyway, it's really fun to see what people did and stuff. But well, thanks again, Josh, for letting me talk about Texas.
Yes, sir. No problem at all. Hey, Sterling, anytime you want to come on and talk about Texas, you are more than welcome to. Anytime at all. Again, Sterling, we appreciate you being on with us today. I really do appreciate it, sir. And again, thank you for the lesson, because it was really a really good one.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. Again, that's Sterling Harris talking about history of Christmas in the state of Texas, and he's been on with us here today on the BIS podcast, broadcasting live on the Marvin Network Christmas edition. Again, we want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Again, thank you, Sterling, for joining us here today. Everyone, again, Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays to everybody. Again, you've been listening to the BIS podcast, and until next time, so long and goodbye.